I want to talk a little bit about, as Marty said, what I've learned from Lee Thayer. And this is part of a couple of projects. One was that Robert K. Logan had put out a call for a special issue of the journal Systema relating systems theory to media ecology. And I devoted my paper there to Lee Thayer, but it was in the context of the upcoming National Communication Association. And I guess I'm going to pass that around to people as well. Here, this is a journal. You want to pass those around? This was a journal that Lee Thayer had put together in 1974. And you can see the editorial board, and it'll give you some sense of who he was. He was the Gallup professor of the Advanced Institute of Iowa in the 70s. He got his PhD from Oklahoma in the 60s, but he was a pretty prominent systems theorist. He also was active in the general semantics area in the 70s, 80s. He did do an edited book on general semantics. And what I tried to do here is, this is to celebrate the NCA that's coming up in November. If people are going to be there, please come to the National Communication Association. There's going to be a special session on that Friday morning talking about Lee Thayer. There's a good number of scholars there. But what I tried to do for today's talk here is I try to boil down these three ideas that I took from Lee Thayer, and it's really forming a single idea. It's hard for me to convey how much this is really just one thought. It's one thought about what this is right here. You say, what is this right here? What is it that we're doing? How do we do what we do when we're making sense with one another? And in some ways, these are cliches. They're phrases that I think are in popular culture. Part of them were used frequently by Thayer. Some of them are ones that I use in class. But I'm just going to walk through it really quickly and sort of read the idea. And then I'm going to see if I can explain in a little bit more detail. So this is the idea. It's that communication occurs when someone takes something into account. That interpretation precedes experience, that knower and the known are two aspects of the same thing, that whatever we know and whatever we know that with are inseparable, that whatever the self describes the self, that whatever Peter tells me about Paul tells me more about Peter than Paul, that we cannot recognize qualities in others that we do not possess in ourselves. It's the first clause. Second clause is that mind is social, that others slide between me and the world, that the price paid for mind was its colonization by other minds, that we know the world on behalf of others, that the limits of expression and the limits of comprehension are the same limits, that if your mind finds intelligible what no other mind does, you likely have a broken one, that you are an enterprise having various stakeholders as well as a stakeholder in various enterprises, that the ability to be influenced is as important or more important than the ability to influence. And that the most important decision you ever make is who to have as parents. And three, that communication, even if referential, is primarily consequential. That talk does not cook rice, that an educated horse doesn't run any faster, that you can't talk yourself out of something you behaved yourself into, that if you're already dead, you won't be able to tell if a place is going to kill you. That if you're not having more fun learning more than other people, doing more social good, it's your own incompetence that is largely to blame. And finally, if you are unhappy with the world, begin by changing yourself. Again, this is a single idea in three different clauses. And I'm going to see if I can walk through this in illustrating it concretely. And I'm going to begin with this notion that communication occurs when someone takes something into account and that the interpretation precedes the experience. Right now, there's a series of acoustical blasts coming out of my mouth. You can hear when one word begins and another word ends. You can sense the discrete separations between the words. And yet, to someone who doesn't speak this language, there's just an ongoing flow, a rapid succession of sounds. But what you hear are words. And the words that I'm speaking, they sound like the meaning is in them. But the meaning that you're hearing is actually the meaning that you're attributing to them. You're interpreting them to such a degree that you experience the interpretation that you're bringing to the words. It's not that my words are carrying meaning. You're being carried by the interpretation that you're articulating as you take these words into account. Right? And that's why whenever people talk about things, they end up talking about themselves. Yeah, they have to, because that's all they could really have access to when they're talking about whatever it is, right? Because interpretation precedes experience, and the knower and the known are inseparable, and what you know and the thing you know it with are two aspects of the same thing. That's why whatever the self describes the self. That's why when Peter tells me something about Paul, it tells me more about Peter than Paul. Right? This is why when we try to look for qualities in others, we're stuck with those that we have in ourselves as our basis. I mean, I think this is part of why Jung does so much work on the study of our shadow. Right? The study of our shadow is largely the study of how we project those things onto others that we could find intelligible because we know that we have them in ourselves. I'm going to go to this issue of mind being social. You can see that even more clearly with the example that I just gave of, as I'm speaking right now, if these words themselves sound like they're meaningful, what that tells me is that you know English. Yeah, that your mind is, it's been colonized, right? You were there in the crib and you went blah, and then the parent said, say cup. Then you went blah, and the mother said, say cup, and then you went cup, and you got lots of applause, and you won sympathy and approval, and in that process, mind emerged, right? Mind emerges out of the power play that comes from your buying into a culture's way of taking the world into account, what you're going to call a good Saturday night, what a meaningful festival is, what relationships are supposed to be like. All of those things become part of what we mean by mind. And I think this is one of the things that's very difficult for students when I'm trying to explain this, is that I think many of them believe that they're born with the mind and it's something inside their heads. They don't seem to see that mind is an ongoing socio-historical process that you fall into. That is, the baby is born with some sort of capacity to take the world into account, but in the intelligibility becomes a set of social constraints where the child emerges into, again, this socio-historical process of mind only as they learn to take the world into account in ways that are comprehensible to others. Right? So again, the system of expression and the system of comprehension are the two aspects of the same thing. It's a quick exercise you can do to students. I'll say to them, try to say something right now that is perfectly clear to you. I mean, utterly intelligible to you, that couldn't be made sense of by another person. Go. It's impossible. Now, I could try. I could do something like eggplant shoe participle lash, and it just, no, that doesn't make any sense. You know how I knew? Because you can't imagine anyone could make sense of that. If you can make sense of something, it's perfectly clear to you that no one else can make sense of, they're going to take you away. You have a broken one, right? Their social intelligibility is the constraint, right? But that also means you're free to improvise on language at any point. You can improvise, you can create words spontaneously with the constraint being, can others understand what you're saying, right? One day I was driving to school, and the weather's bad in Michigan. I don't know if people realize this. Sometimes the weather's really bad. Got a lot of snow. And I was going this way, and it was kind of icy. And I wasn't sure if it was a left turn. I was looking, and this person was following too close behind me, and I could tell that I kind of Mr. Magoo'd the guy into the ditch, right? Now, can I use Mr. Magoo as a verb? For those who can understand, I can. See, somehow language itself isn't a set of representations for things. It's an ongoing process of social intelligibility that's open to plastic reinterpretations, right? Okay, I think the most difficult one is the third clause. It's to understand that what we're doing when we're doing this right here is not transmitting ideas. I'm not sending ideas from my head to you. There's no transmission. What we're doing is we're co-navigating toward a future. We're co-navigating toward a future. Think of bats. You know, bats give echolocation, and they navigate through space. In some way, you can think about this, we intersubjectively echolocate toward a co-navigated future. That is, we talk about possibilities, probabilities, potential obstacles, and in intersubjectively taking those things into account, we're able to navigate to things such as this convention. I mean, Marty was able to put this together through a bunch of symbols, and we're able to be here. And I think this is, as I say, this is one of the more difficult concepts related to this, because I do think we have a tendency to think of language primarily as referential rather than consequential. So again, we try to think of some different examples here. I think food is probably the best example. Food is probably the best example. That is, what a given culture calls food. So beetles and slugs, they look at that and they go, not food. Crap in a Doritos bag, they go, oh, food. And T.S. Eliot would remind us most people dig their graves with their teeth, right? That is, we're in the process of navigating toward a future by how we have become made intelligible to take the world into account. And there are really direct consequences of the way that we relate to the larger environment, the way that our dietary practices have a huge impact on both socio-politically and individually. I guess maybe I'll just try to wrap up here with, I think that maybe the one way to end this is that, Thayer, I think he really believes wholeheartedly that many people underestimate their capacity to self-fashion, or at least to intersubjectively create the kinds of environments in which they can thrive. And he would sort of force this issue that if you're not able to thrive, that's your job. Your job is to figure out what you can do to make that happen. And I think he would also add to that part of it is the responsibility of the listener to decide, is this really in your best interest or not, right? There's a great line that goes, if you knew the difference between good advice and bad advice, you'd probably need very little advice, right? So there's a sense in which I would encourage everyone in here, feel free to misunderstand anything and everything that I've said today, if it's for your benefit and the benefit of humanity. Thank you.